The Rebel Capitalist Show.
What do you see nowadays as far as crisis investing opportunities? And I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more of them because what the central banks are doing around the world. I'd love to get your take on that. But what are you looking at as far as that type of investment in the world today, right now?
Yes, it's much trickier due to all of the money printing that's gone on. That's totally warped valuations beyond any sane levels, pretty much anywhere in the world. And things like Cyprus, they don't happen every day, but they're not completely infrequent either. So it's good to kind of keep an eye out for them when they do occur. Honestly, there's not a Cyprus-type situation going on at the moment right now. I'm in Argentina, though, at the moment, and Argentina is extremely cheap. But I suspect it's going to get even cheaper because they're on the cusp of a perennial hyperinflation, which happens like clockwork here. So I suspect that will happen in the next year, 18 months. And when that happens, you can look for bargains in Argentina. I think that could be a place you could look because I think they are genuinely headed to one of these crises. Not yet, but soon. So where do you find value?
What do you think about Venezuela on that note?
Yeah, that is also tricky too. That you could find value in Venezuela. That is even more challenging because of sanctions and financial restrictions. And the fact that you would have to, I've looked into Venezuela. There's no Venezuelan stocks that trade in the US. There's no Venezuelan stocks that trade in any accessible international market. What that means is you got to go to Caracas and open a brokerage account, much like you did in Cyprus. However, it's going to be much harder to do than it was in Cyprus because of sanctions. Venezuela's on very hard, tough sanctions, getting money in, getting money out. Right. I've concluded it's really not worth it because the only way to get money in legally, Venezuela has a bunch of different exchange rates. You're going to get raped on the exchange rate. They're going to take. It's not like you're going to get an honest exchange rate if you wire money. If you can somehow get past the sanctions to wire money to Venezuela, they're going to confiscate it with a bad exchange rate, which is not the market exchange rate. So the only way to do that is to bring physical money there or find a way to get money in. And it's just been tricky. Real estate is also an interesting opportunity in Venezuela too. If there is, I think, a place called Isla Margarita, which is an island off of Venezuela. That is an interesting, potentially interesting area. But there's lots of problems with that. So it hasn't worked out as a practical manner, but it's on my radar.
Yeah, the logistics with Cyprus were very easy.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the main, and then that was on the euro.
Yes.
So you didn't have a lot of that currency fluctuation and all that craziness. So when you look at these crisis markets and you're kind of doing this research with Doug, what do you look for as far as a catalyst? Because you said with Argentina that it's probably going to get worse. And I know studying Jim Rogers for all these years, it's not just going in and buying something when it's dirt cheap. You've got to see some sort of catalyst that would most likely trigger a move, or that macro event has got to be temporary, which I would argue would fall into what Cyprus was all about. Yes. So how do you guys determine a catalyst, and what do you generally look for?
Yeah, that is hugely important because things can stay cheap for many years. And that's what you want to look for. Really, what is helpful is finding places. You look at what the media is telling you is a disaster, because they typically overblow these things. When you look back at Cyprus, they overblew Cyprus. They totally overblew it. So what you want to look for is a disconnect between the media, how the media portrays it, and what's really going on. And that also is another reason why I found Colombia. Colombia is attractive too. I mean, they've had a chronic. It's basically over. Maybe it's on again, off again. But they had the longest running war in the Americas. 50-year war, and it's basically over. Colombia's turned a new leaf. So I look for a perception gap, and when you can find that perception gap, usually a lot of that negativity is because of what the media is pumping. And when the situation goes from horrible to bad, as you were talking, that's when the situation goes from horrible to bad, when the media finds the next shiny object. Okay, it's gone from horrible to bad, not horrible to good, but that's one of the things. And it's a case-by-case basis. Cyprus had, for the example of Cyprus, they had different catalysts. They were exploiting gas reserves offshore. That was going to be a boom to their economy. They were going to go through certain metrics, such as removing capital controls, which would more money would come in. So it's really a case by case basis.
Yeah, good point. So when did you start looking at Colombia? I don't know if you know this, but I started investing there in real estate in 2015, and I've been doing so heavily. And I've got a team there of 20, 30 people when you include the subs and everything, that we go and we buy and renovate those apartments down in the Provenza area around Parque Aris and the Golden Mile, and that whole area I'm sure that you know well. But I started doing that in 2015 because of a macro situation where the price of oil got down below $30 a barrel, and I knew nothing about oil, but I knew a lot about real estate. So I said, well, okay, the Colombian peso's kind of tied to oil. So if I buy an asset denominated in pesos, it's kind of like doing the same, going long oil. So I'll just buy Colombian real estate. So that's how I started. But then once I spent time in Medellin, I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. If you look at the price per square meter relative to the rest of South America, it's super cheap. And then what I discovered is the market is so wildly inefficient that if you're a local expert, you can really exploit that. Or if you're just a gringo coming down trying to buy something on a website, you're most likely going to be the person being exploited. But anyway, can you go into a deep dive on your analysis with Colombia?
Well, you described exactly how I came to Colombia. I also came to Colombia in 2015. I came initially at the invitation of a emerging cannabis company, and while there, I was investigating real estate too. And you're right. At that time, I had the exact same kind of investment thesis in Medellin, because of what was going on with the oil price. And that made Medellin and Colombia assets in general extremely cheap for people holding dollars, because actually oil is one of the largest exports of Colombia.
Right.
And when oil price goes down, that hurts the local currency. But what's unique to Colombia is that real estate trades in the local currency. It trades in pesos. Most real estate in Latin America trades in US dollars. So it doesn't really matter if there's much fluctuation with the exchange rate. Colombia is different. So when the peso depreciates by 30%, well, real estate just got 30% cheaper for US dollar holders, which was terrific. So no, I actually had the exact same investment thesis, looked over there and found it to be extremely attractive. Rental yields were very compelling. Cost per square meter was extremely compelling. And it also had the added ingredient of being kind of a contrarian play. You just ask the average person what they think of Medellin. They think it's a war zone and Pablo Escobar and all that crap you see on Netflix. So yeah, that was part of its history, but it's its history. This is not how it is today at all. Anybody who's been there would tell you the same. So that's kind of what played into it. It was a value play. It was, I still call it somewhat of a crisis investing play. The crisis is just a chronic 50-year crisis. I mean, back in 2015, it was there was no peace deal. There was none of that yet.
So
yes. So it was still considered a war zone, Colombia, involved in an active war. So it was, it checked all the boxes, and it's a pleasant place to be. It's the city of eternal springtime year round. It's a beautiful place. So I'm still bullish on Colombia, Medellin. I like it, and would consider, looking at other investments there.